A few days ago, 25-year-old Antifa activist Jason Charter was arrested for attempting to destroy a statue of former President Andrew Jackson near the White House. About a week prior to that, on his Twitter account, Charter declared that tearing down statues of traitors to the nation is a service to this nation, not a crime. At Fort Greene Park in Brooklyn, a small group of protesters demanding that the New York City Police Department be defunded began to burn an American flag. A group of bikers, known as the Hallowed Sons, quickly confronted the protesters and began to physically assault them, beating them until the protesters ran away to protect themselves. These two incidents speak volumes about the depth of the current polarization in this country. What one person sees as a service to the nation is seen by others as destroying the fabric of this nation. And what one sees as a peaceful means of valid protest is seen by others to be so threatening it evokes a visceral, violent reaction. Unfortunately, it goes much deeper than two sides battling for the future of the country. Allow me to explain. In 2008, prominent sociologist Tom Burns said, "Most human social activity is organized and regulated by socially produced rules and systems of rules." Burns says that a society comes to a collective agreement on what is acceptable and what's not acceptable in terms of personal and public behavior, economic policy and governance, personal rights and obligations, etc. In other words, people in a society, as one large group, determine the rules of the game. And this makes sense. Each society decides its own rules of behavior. What we consider polite or rude has been developed over time as we have grown as a civilization. Tom Burns acknowledges that this process of society coming to an agreement on these things is, quote, often accompanied by conflict and struggle, and that major struggles in human history revolve around this process of rulemaking. In light of what Tom Burns says here, it makes sense that we have struggle and conflict as our nation grows and further develops its rules of the game. But I think, unfortunately, the starker reality is that we have groups of people at serious conflict, not just because they're trying to develop different rules of the game, but because they're looking at entirely different games. One person who views the nation as bad isn't even in the same ballpark as someone who views the nation as good. And significantly more troubling, and here's where I think the real root of the problem lies. If we have very different views on what it means to be a human person, then naturally that gives rise to the most intense and divisive conflicts imaginable, just like the American Civil War. In the news media and in social media, in the rise of the internet information age, it's become normal not just to attack someone's opposing point of view, but to attack them as a person. You see, if one person thinks that being human means to be kind, then judging someone to be unkind can lead to thinking of them as not really human, someone undeserving of respect or even basic sympathy and care. Friends, we see this all around us. In one group's loud and clear calls of hope for some people to get sick and die from coronavirus because they attend a political rally, or in another group's hope for people to get hurt and die from a lack of emergency services because they want to reform or defund the police. And inside each of these groups, there's intense pressure within them to think and act according to one orthodox and uncompromising state of mind. Someone caught on camera doing something or making a simple statement that doesn't conform to this orthodoxy isn't just corrected. They're demonized, dehumanized, threatened with physical violence, fired from their jobs, disavowed by their friends, and sometimes in Orwellian fashion, even erased from history or disowned by their own families. These are terrible conflicts arising from all these competing rules and different definitions of humanity, and it can make life incredibly burdensome. We try our best to be a good person, not to offend anyone, not to be a snowflake, to live justly and act righteously. But in the end, it just seems that someone finds serious fault with whatever we do or believe. Although the context is a bit different, it's this very burden that Jesus Christ is referring to in today's gospel reading. You see, Jesus is encountering resistance from the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and the leaders of the Jewish temple. Everywhere he turns, he faces opposition. And he speaks to people that might want to follow him, potential new disciples who feel lost and out of place. Everywhere they turn, they're being told that in order to be a good Jew, they must do this ritual, act this way, perform this custom, etc. And oftentimes what they're hearing is different depending on who's speaking. So Christ says, "Come to me, all you who are weary of this, weary of the burden of trying to follow the rules of the game when the goalposts are constantly shifting or placed so far away they can't be reached." He says, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light." His yoke is obedience to his teaching, which is simple. It's the golden rule. Do unto others whatever you would have them do to you, he says in chapter 7, verse 12. And later, when asked about what the greatest commandment is, he replies with two of them. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He says the whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. And so, folks, in these simple statements, he tells us everything we need to know about the rules of the game. In these statements, my brothers and sisters, we find the answer to today's conflicts and struggles. We can shout from the rooftops about the evils of racism, euthanasia, the death penalty, and abortion. And we can talk and argue all we want about the breakdown of the family, the plight of the poor, and everything else that's ignored or redefined. But the source of our beliefs, the foundational, universal, and authentic truth that we must promote above all else, is what it means to be human, that we are defined in God's image and created to be loved by him and to love him in return, individually and together, as one humanity in the love of Jesus Christ. Christ says to us, "Come to me, I am meek, I am humble of heart." The heart of Jesus, says Catholic scholar Scott Hahn, is the point of union, the bond between the divinity of our Lord and his humanity. The heart is more than a symbol. It is the center of our lives, the source of our very personhood. And so, in the heart of Jesus Christ, we find the rest and simplicity we yearn for. We learn the true definition of a human being. My friends, let us learn our moral code and our societal rules from the heart of Jesus Christ and not our social media feed. Let us boldly proclaim the true meaning of what it means to be human and live our life as the God-given gift that it is, in loving service to God and his church, and in loving service to each other. May God be praised.